Thank you, Megan. All right, how are we doing tonight, everybody?
Great.
Well, thanks for being here. We'll get started in just a moment. Just waiting for the awkward elephant to sit down in the back of the room. Pornography and masturbation, things you don't really hear a whole lot about. And those are the things I want to talk about tonight. I want to talk about how dangerous it is, and then talk about the hope and the healing that can come. I want to start by reading from Scripture, Matthew 12. It's from Matthew 12, 43 to 45. When an unclean spirit goes out of a person, it roams through arid regions searching for rest, but finds none. Then it says, I will return to my home from which I came. But upon returning, it finds it empty, swept clean, and put in order. Then it goes and brings back with itself 7 other spirits more evil than itself. And they move in and dwell there. And the last condition of that person is worse than the first. I don't know about you, but I think that's one of the most terrifying verses in Scripture. And we're going to go back to it later. But we all have sins and evil spirits that haunt us. For me, pornography and masturbation have been 2 of mine, and they've been around for most of my life. They say that most boys start seeking pornography around the age of 10. For me, it was around that age. I grew up, I loved video games, and I would get video game magazines into my house. And I remember one time I was around that age, and on the back I saw they were promoting some wrestling game, and they had a picture of this girl with a bikini on. And the first time I saw that was the first time I learned to masturbate. And I kept that magazine, I had it in my locker, no one else knew about it. And I kept collecting more and more. By the time I got to middle school, I was hooked. And high school became a daily ritual. I was always looking for times to kind of be alone. I was hoping my parents would leave so I could kind of have my quiet time so I could look at these magazines and masturbate. The sad reality is that viewing pornography has kind of become the norm. I remember where masturbation has. When I was in high school, I was a freshman, and there was this cool senior who came up to me, and he said, Brock, he goes, do you masturbate every single day? And I was totally shocked that he asked me that. I was like, no, of course not, man. What are you talking about? But he was asking, of course I did, and but it was something you didn't really talk about. You talked about sex a lot, but the whole idea of looking at pornography or masturbation was sort of like this sort of shame-based culture that wasn't really spoken about. I went off to college without ever having a real relationship. My views that women were meant to be used. I couldn't wait to go to college, finally get away from my small town roots, go off to a big university, finally have fun, live, meet all these beautiful women that I've seen in the movies and in the magazines. And I was going to have all kinds of sex. I couldn't wait. When I was a freshman in college, I fell into a lot of those sins. I partied a lot, I had sex, I was going out looking for that high. I didn't realize that I was training my mind for how my future relationships would be. I was training my mind of what I was to expect. And the girls I interacted with were never quite like the ones I saw in the magazines or on TV. Even throughout college, I never really had a real relationship. Looking back, the ones I did have, they would always turn physical right away. Within a couple of weeks, it would just be a pure physical relationship, and I would get bored of it, honestly. I'd get tired of it. I'd be ready to move on to somebody else. When I was a sophomore in college, I had a major reconversion back to the faith. I grew up Catholic. I had 2 great, loving parents, but the faith was never really important to me. And I met a lot of people who were living the faith, and they were full of joy, and I wanted that. And I had this big reconversion back, and I got my first Bible, the one I still got right there. I was learning about the faith. I had a guy like mentoring me, and I was like just pumped up, full of life. I was changing a lot of my ways, and yet I still struggled with pornography and masturbation. I would go in spurts. Maybe some of you can relate. A couple of good days, maybe a good week, 2 good weeks, 3 weeks, and then I'd be sitting there just kind of white knuckling it, just trying to hold on for your dear life. But I'd always fall. I remember going to confession, and the priest told me that looking at pornography and masturbation was a major sin. And I was thinking, I was like, man, why is this such a big deal? I'm not hurting anybody. It's just me. It's way better than actually having sex, right? So why is the church so against this? And the reason why the church is so against this is the whole idea of love versus lust. When we look at these things and commit these acts, we're conditioning ourselves to take instead of to give. Pope St. John Paul II said the problem with pornography is not that it shows too much of a woman, but that it shows too little. It reduces them to a sexual object for our own gratification. To love someone is to will the good of the other, and that's not what pornography teaches us. We hear in Matthew, Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you, everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart." And that's a very tough message we hear, but it's true. It's not how Christ teaches us to love. We're called to love as Christ loves, which is freely, totally, faithfully, and fruitfully. And we hear this in Ephesians 5, where St. Paul talks about, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church." We ask, well, how did Christ love? Christ offered himself to the point of death, giving everything he had. Pornography and masturbation is the complete opposite of that. But you often hear the argument about guys, right? He's just a guy. He can't really control himself. All guys really think about anymore, anyways, is boobs, beer, and sports, right? They only get 3 things going through the mind at once, right? I think about, for work, I travel from time to time, and I was on the East Coast for a work trip, and after we were done, we were hanging out at a friend's house, and they had this stray dog they adopted into their home, and his name was Einstein. And he's this white little fluffy dog, and he was kind of ugly, a little shaggy looking. I took him into the home, and for some reason Einstein really liked me. I walked in the door. As soon as I walked in, he immediately looked at me, ran right towards my right leg, and began humping my right leg. And he was just sitting there, just humping it for like 10 seconds, and I didn't know what to do. It was really awkward. Everyone thinks it was hilarious. And the whole night, I kid you not, I eventually got him off. And I'm sitting there walking around talking to other people. Einstein was just sitting there just looking at me, just ready to pounce. And at least 2 more times I tried to walk across the room, he would catapult himself on my leg again. And it was awkward. But that is a dog. They don't have free will. They can't always control their instincts. We are people, and even guys can actually control our sexual desires. It's true. It may not always seem like it, but it's possible. You see so much of what a real man is how many girls he can have sex with. That's not what a true man is. You see that in movies today and TV shows. I think about a year ago, I went to a men's conference where they had some true Catholic men. There was Philip Rivers, quarterback for the Chargers. Mike Sweeney was there. He played professional baseball. All these great speakers. And these guys are sitting there talking about how they live their lives. These guys are praying. They're praying the rosary. They're talking to their kids about the faith. They're being true to their wives. And these guys have temptation like you would not believe. Just guys, girls just throwing themselves at these guys. And yet, these are true men. That is what we're called to be. You know, a real man is someone that leads, provides, and protects. That is what a true man is. That's what we're all called to be. But I felt like Einstein the dog. I knew I wasn't an animal, but I couldn't stop. Maybe some of you can relate with this thing. Maybe you felt frustrated before, hopeless, angry. Why me? Why do I have to struggle with this? There's been a lot of new studies that have come out recently. Studies on pornography and its effects on the brain. And they're showing how with high-speed internet, when people grow up with this, and they're looking at pornography, it's so much tougher to stop than what it used to be. And we're just going to show a quick little video right now that kind of highlights that. The pornography industry is the fastest growing industry in the world. In 2006, there were over $13 billion in revenue in the United States alone. That's more money combined than what the MLB, NFL, and NBA take in a year. There's over $97 billion a year in revenue worldwide. There are over 500 million pornographic websites. 1 in 4 internet searches is sexually related. 68% of young adult men in the last week have looked at pornography. 18% of those have been young adult women. 85% of young adult men have looked at pornography in the last month. And 48% of young adult women have looked at pornography in the last month. We often think this is just something that guys struggle with, but it's not true. A lot of women struggle with this as well. I want all of you to do an exercise with me. If you can put both your hands in the air. Take your thumb, right thumb, put it on the inside, and take your 4 fingers and put it over your thumb. And do the same thing with your left hand. And then take your fist and put them together. Interlock with the knuckles. If you look at it, that is approximately the size of your brain. It's about 3 pounds in weight. It has over, you can put your hands back. It has over 100 billion neurons, the brain does. Each neuron has over 10,000 different connections with other neurons, and I don't know what any of that means, except that it's very sophisticated and very complicated. Your brain makes over 3 billion decisions per second. And most of these are unconscious decisions. And when you do something enough over time, you don't think about it, right? You just respond a certain way. And when you've done something so many times, these neurons can actually become wired together. Now, when you look at pornography, your brain convinces itself you're having sex. That's what it does. Large amounts of the chemical dopamine are released, and it makes you feel good. It's in your brain, it releases, and it feels good. And if this happens over enough times, it can lead up to a buildup of a protein called delta phos B, and it can actually change your brain. Think about what happens if you look at pornography once a week for a year. What about 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? If you've ever tried to stop looking at pornography or masturbation, and you wonder why is it so hard, it's because these neurons have actually become joined together. And for you to stop this, you literally have to break a connection that you have been training your mind to do for as long as you've been doing this. They've actually had MRIs done of the brain, and they show an MRI of a brain before pornography, then they have the studies go and look at it, and they show it afterwards, and the brain changes. And scientists say it is just as addictive as meth and cocaine. There was a study done among divorced lawyers, and they asked these lawyers, so why are your clients getting divorced? And there were multiple reasons why, and the clients could put different reasons. 56% of all the clients said that one party had an obsessive interest in pornographic websites. So why is this? Why is this so damaging to the family? We should be very aware of this as Catholics. Pornography, it teaches us arousal addiction. When you're looking at something, you're usually not just looking at one picture. Usually you've got a couple of browsers up where you're going from picture to picture time, different one, and you're training your mind not just to look at one, but to look at multiple again and again and again, over and over, just moving from one to the next. And what we see is not real. That this is not what love is. This is not what marriage is. The sex that you see in these movies and these pictures, this is not how it is. No spouse can ever fulfill what you see. When you look at these things, you're training your mind to be disappointed for the future. But, I mentioned all those things, this wasn't going to happen to me, though, this addiction, because I wasn't addicted. I didn't have an issue, or so I thought. I was trying my best. I was going to Mass. I was even leading Bible study. I had software on my phone and on my computer sending reports to my friends, trying to hold me accountable. But I was still struggling. I kept going to confession. I felt like a broken record. Going the same every couple days, every week, same thing over and over again. Just the same old story. Why wasn't God healing me? I think about what St. Paul says when he writes the letter to the Romans. He says, "What I do not understand. For I do not what I want, but I do what I hate. Maybe some of you have felt the same way. A little while later, I went to the East Coast for another work trip that I had. I was going to be in a hotel by myself for a week. Before I left, I had found a way to disable the setting on my iPhone. And I knew I had access to this. I had free reign. And I'm on the plane, and I'm just getting pummeled with these thoughts, these temptations. Just go ahead. You haven't looked at pornography in a while. Go ahead and just take a look. It's one website. What's it going to do? It's not a big deal. If anything, you can finally go to sleep at night because your brain's just going crazy right now. Just look at it once, and you can finally be at peace. I looked at one pornographic site that night when I flew in, and I was hooked. I was looking at hardcore pornography, and I couldn't stop. I would look at it, and I would put it down. I would masturbate, and then I would say, I'm not going to look at this again. Within 15 minutes later, I was looking at it again. And I would put it down, and I was just disgusted. I'm not going to look at this again. Within 15 more minutes later, I was looking at it again. I was doing it all morning when I woke up. When I was at work, I couldn't even concentrate at work because I was just thinking about this all the time. I couldn't wait to get back. I would go to my hotel room. I was supposed to be studying, and I was looking at it again. And it would happen all night. It consumed all of my energy and my attention. I didn't feel good. I felt horrible. I felt dirty. I felt defeated and embarrassed. It was 5 days in a row of pure hell. And every time, I would always tell myself, this is it. This is the last time. Only to do it again a couple of minutes later. And then one night I was standing there, and I had this revelation that came to me. I'll never forget this. I was standing there in my hotel room, and this thought came through my mind that just sent chills through my body. And I envisioned myself in a couple of years, and it was late at night, and my wife was sleeping in her room. In another room, I had a 1 or 2 year old kid who was asleep. And the next room was me looking at pornography and masturbating. And that thought sickened me. And I realized that if I have never been able to stop this my entire life, how is this going to change? And either that's going to happen to me, or one day my wife's going to come in and see me looking at this. And that's not what I was wanting to have happen. I forced myself down to the hotel lobby. They have those computers, they're the public ones. And I wrote one of the most awkward emails I've ever written in my life to a bunch of my friends. And I laid it all on the line. I said, here's what's really going on. I'm struggling. I've been struggling with this for a long time. I don't know how to get over this. What can I do? What else should I be doing? What do you guys have any insight? I remember one of my friends wrote back and he said, you can't just run away from our sin. I've been trying just to kind of run away from it and avoid it, but we have to be healed from within. I'm not saying don't avoid lust. I'm the biggest proponent of that, but there has to be a healing component. If you know me, you know that I'm a very competitive guy. I like to win at everything. If we're playing basketball with your grandma, I will try to beat her. That's what I love to do. And I'm a firm believer that if you give everything you've got, if you do the work, the score will take care of itself. If you hit the weight room, if you do the repetitions over and over again, if you do those things, you'll eventually succeed on game day. Well, I tell you, when it comes to sexual sin, your personal strength will never be enough. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this, it is you can't just outwork this. You have to let God come in and play a big role in your healing recovery. You have to surrender. And when I was on the plane flying back to San Diego, I wrote in my journal one of the best prayers I've ever written in my entire life. And it was basically this: Lord, I can't do this. I need you to help heal me. So the first thing we have to do is surrender, and then we have to want to change. We have to want to change this part of our lives. Sometimes we can convince ourselves that it can't be done. I've been doing this sin for way too long, and it's impossible to have healing. But I tell you, it can be done. I stand before you, proud to say that I haven't looked at pornography and I haven't masturbated in over 14 months. And that's not anything that I've done, but it's what God has done through me. But if we're going to do something, if we're going to change, we can't just keep doing the same things expecting different results. I want to talk about 3 things that helped me on my road to recovery. First one is get rid of the stuff. Second is prayer. And third is accountability. Get rid of the stuff, prayer, and accountability. The first one, get rid of the stuff. If you really want to change, the first thing you got to do is try and cut off your funnel to this. If you have magazines you look at, you struggle with, go home tonight, take the magazines, and get rid of those things. For me, it was a loophole I had on my phone. I had to cut that off. I had to put the software on, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but I had to cut that off. If you continually struggle when you have a computer in your room at night by yourself, then I tell you to take the computer and put it in a public spot. Do something different. What is it that is holding you down? What is that? If it's an iPhone, get a flip phone or get some sort of software on it, which I'll talk about at the end. Second thing is prayer. If you remember that passage I read at the beginning from Matthew about the spirits, and it came back and it found it was empty. What was wrong with that? Well, the problem wasn't that these evil spirits had gone out, but that there was nothing to fill the void with. That when the evil spirits came out and it came back, it was completely empty. And if we just try and get rid of pornography or these images in our mind, that's a good start, but we have to fill it with something else. So when it does come back, and it will, it needs to be filled with God, with other things. As Catholics, we believe you can't earn heaven. But we believe that God gives us grace. And we have to be open to receiving that grace. And as Catholics, we have a lot of tools. You always hear the phrase, you are what you eat. What images are you putting into your mind? What thoughts, what songs you listen to, what books are you reading, what's going through your mind? Now, I've been told hundreds of times, maybe you have too, about the power of the rosary. And I've always said, you know what, that's great, but that doesn't really work for me. I can't really concentrate a lot. I get bored too easy. It's not really my thing, but thanks for telling me about it. I'll do it later. Thank you. I've heard hundreds of talks. There's millions of books about it. Everyone says the same thing. But I would always say, well, it doesn't really work for me. Maybe you've said the same thing. Let me give you a scenario. Let's say for a moment, I like sports. Let's say for a moment, you want to be the best golfer in the world. You say, you know what? My life's calling is to be a golfer, so I'm going to be the best golfer that's ever walked this earth. And so you go and you find the top 5 golfers that have ever played the game of golf, and you find them in the corner of a room and you ask them, hey, what makes you so successful? What are the things that you did? And every golfer told you it was one thing, it was the same thing, and it was putting. So you know what? Putting was by far the most powerful, best thing you can do. So you go with the 5th guy, the 5th best in the world, he says, you know what? I'm so committed to putting, I putt 100 putts a day. You ask the 4th best player in the world, he says, you know what? I'm so convinced that putting is key that I putt 150 putts a day. The third best player says 200, and so on. And you go with the best player in the world who's ever played the game of golf, and you go, can you just tell me what is the key? I'll do anything. I'm so committed to doing this. I'm going to be the best golfer in the world one day, but just tell me your secret. What is it? And he says, I'll be honest with you, it's putting. And I'm so convinced of this that I get up at 5 a.m. every morning and I practice 500 putts a day. So if you were going to begin your journey and you make your practice schedule, you better have something with putting in it. If you don't, you are an idiot. If you say to yourself, you know what, that's all nice, but I think I'm going to work on my chipping game or on my middle irons, you are a complete idiot and you're not going to be any good. When we look at all the great saints who have walked this earth, and we have a ton of them, and as Catholics, we are so lucky to have this, what do they all have in common? Almost every saint has a deep devotion to the rosary and a deep relationship with Mary. And so if you want to be great, if you want to be a saint, if you want to get to heaven, then don't overthink this. Don't let yourself say, that's not for me, it's not really, well, no, shut up. And this works, and people have done it. And maybe you haven't done it before, and you're not sure where to begin. And you don't have to pray a full rosary. You can start. You can just pray one decade. 10 Hail Marys, 1 Our Father. Do that once and slowly build up. It can be done. If you want to be pure, pray the rosary. If you want to stay in sin, then don't pray the rosary. I'm not saying that praying the rosary is going to wipe away all of your problems and it's going to be a cakewalk. But it is our biggest weapon against the dragon of lust. Bishop Hugh Doyle says, no one can continually live in sin and continue to say the rosary. Either he will give up sin or he'll give up the rosary. We have May as the month of Mary. I think it's great that I was asked to talk during this month. I hopefully encourage you, if you haven't done so, to start today. Maybe it's been a while, start right now. Why is that? Well, whenever we pray to Mary, the Queen of Purity, when we ask for her intercession, when we meditate on her life and on the life of Christ, we can begin to change our hearts and begin to change our minds. The second part of prayer is fasting. It's something we don't always talk a whole lot about as Catholics. But it's fasting, and it's so huge. If you aren't able to not eat a second cookie, you're sitting there and you're eating your meal, you have a cookie, and the second one there, and you want the cookie, and you're not able to not have that, then how are you going to be able to not look at pornography or not masturbate when you're by yourself in your room and no one's around? We have to win these small battles. And if we win these small battles, we can begin to train our minds and our wills for when we face the real battles that lay ahead. It doesn't have to just be food. Maybe you love music, so one day a week you decide, I'm just going to sit in silence on the way to work. You're not going to look on Facebook for a couple hours. Or instead of getting a Diet Coke out with your friends tonight after work or something, you're going to go out and you're going to get a water. Or instead of getting a steak, you're going to, it's going to be so hard, you're going to get chicken. All these different things. It may seem silly, but it's winning the small battles that are so huge. As Catholics, we have the sacraments, which are so huge. Confession, the Eucharist. I mentioned before that I felt like a broken record with this. And often people who struggle with this sin feel the same way. Where you're going to confession weekly, every couple of days, constantly doing the same thing. And I tell you, if you ever think that you shouldn't go to confession, that is Satan telling that in your mind. I remember a good priest friend of mine told me, every time you go to confession, Satan screams from the bowels of hell. And I love that. He doesn't want you to go. And it doesn't matter how many times you've fallen down and you've sinned, you can start over and begin anew. And we believe that when you go back to confession, you have extra graces to help with that sin in the future. Please take advantage of confession. It's been so powerful for me. And the Eucharist, we've been able to receive the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ. Filling our hearts and our minds with that is so powerful. The third thing is accountability. Software, it's huge for me. I said, getting rid of that, of the stuff. For me, it's the software that's on there. On your guys' on the ground, you guys should have a list with some resources on there that I put together. One of them is Covenant Eyes, which I recommend, and you can use it for your iPhone or for your computer. There's Accountable to You. There's different kinds of resources that are out there, but they're out there. And if you want to make a step, I tell you, this is a huge first step. Hold yourself accountable. For me, it was also talking to people. Like I said before, it's a very shame-based sin where people think, I've got to hold it in, I can't tell anyone else about this. Well, you're not alone. I mentioned the numbers before. A lot of people in this room struggle with this, and you're not alone. Holding it in is the worst thing we can do. I found a great support group. I meet with guys weekly, and we talk about what's going on, and we're open about things. I also meet with the group, and I have on the sheet, that meets at the Rock Church. It's called FMO. It's called For Men Only. And it's similar to an AA group, but it's for guys with sexual addiction. And you go through a workbook written by a therapist, and you meet in groups of guys, and you talk about our sexual sins, and you encourage each other. And it's so powerful because there's so many great guys. You don't have to be Protestant, I go, I'm Catholic, and it's great. I mentioned women struggle with this, and you can do the same thing. Getting together with a group of women and just talking about what struggles you have, that's the best, one of the best things we can do. There's also counseling. I listed on the sheet. There's Reineke Associates, which is a group here in San Diego, which specializes in sexual addiction, which is really a great tool you can use. There's Theology of the Body, which I know we're going to talk about at the end, which I've learned a lot about. And there's a bunch of resources, websites, books, ways to get help. We can often think that this only affects ourselves, and if we think that, we're wrong. I can speak from personal experience and say that I was in a serious relationship for about a year when I had this fall myself. And when my girlfriend found out about it, she was completely devastated. I felt completely cheated on. I met a lot of guys at this group I go to, the FMO, who've talked about marriages have been just shattered. And a lot of these guys haven't come willing. They're coming because their wives found them and they've been divorced, or they're having horrible issues that happen and their wives don't trust them. These things are real, or they've led to other things. It's led from pornography to prostitution to adultery. It's a vicious cycle that can control and take hold of your life. And a lot of women struggle, and guys do, just of body image issues, because looking at these things, when they know you're looking at it, it's a bad cycle that goes around and around. I remember just the other day I was talking to a friend of mine who was saying he struggles with this, with pornography and masturbation. He was saying that, but he always told himself, you know what, when I get married, then I'll take care of it. Here I'm single right now, but when I get married, then I'm going to stop. Then I won't ever look at it again. Or when I have kids, when I have my first kid, no, I'm not going to look at it anymore. I'll stop. It's going to be the end of it. He told me, he goes, Brock, he goes, you know what? Nothing changes. There is no magic wand that just changes this. We have to do something different. We have to address this head on, or else it's going to continue to be around in our lives. If you wait for the future, it's never going to happen. If you aren't convinced about the things I've talked about tonight, I just want to say that this industry is such a horrible, horrible industry. Over 2/3 of all porn performers have herpes. The suicide rate is astronomically high. There's been more and more interviews that have been done, websites helping people who are old porn performers, and they're talking about what it's like to be in the videos, and they say everyone's in complete misery. They're on hard drugs to mask the pain, to keep performing time and time again. And I tell you, it's all fake. It leads directly into sex trafficking. It's horrible. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, you know what, I don't pay for anything, I just go and look at the free stuff. I tell you, even when you click on the free stuff, you are supporting this horrible industry. Every time you look at something, a demand is generated and a supply is met. So I tell you, please do not support this industry. We are made for love, not pornography. Pornography is the abandonment of love. Throughout this process, I've been able to change my thoughts and my heart. I've learned a lot about theology of the body, which is God's true plan of love for each and every one of us. As I've done this, as I've grown in prayer, the images have started to go away. I've begun to replace them with good thoughts, and the renewal has begun. There is hope. We talk about sin being slaves to that, and I felt that way before. But there is hope. It doesn't have to control your life. I realize now that the struggle was an invitation to draw closer to Christ and to His Blessed Mother. And it was an invitation to drive out the demons in my heart and fill them with love. My life has changed, but I had to do something different. I'm very excited to say that I stand before you. I am engaged to a very beautiful woman, and that I'm madly in love with. And we're going to get married in August, and I'm very excited about that. And I've noticed how our relationship has changed as I've changed. So I ask you, what are you going to do tonight? If you struggle, or you know someone who struggles with it, what are you going to do? There's, on the handout, I've listed a lot of resources. I've also listed my personal information. And by no means do you have to contact me, but if you want to reach out, I'd be more than happy to talk to you on the phone, get an email. And I encourage you to check out the information that was given. I'm still tempted. It's not like I'm perfect up here. And I have to keep praying every day. And there is no simple solution. I pray the rosary every single day. And that has been very powerful for me, as well as the other things I've done. I tell you, the last thing I want to say is just don't give up. If you fell an hour before coming here tonight, that's okay. If you go home tonight and you fall, it's okay. Do not give up. Believe in God's mercy. Believe in His plan to give you a life full of hope, of joy, and of freedom from the sin that He desperately wants to give you. I want to leave you with one of my favorite verses in Scripture is John 1:5. And to me, this symbolizes a lot of the struggle. A light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And I thank you for listening. And I'm just going to close with the Memorare. I want to ask anyone who knows it to pray it with me as we pray. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled without protection, implored thy help, sought thy intercession, was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, I fly unto thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my Mother.
sorrowful, O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me.
Mary, Queen of purity,
Pray for us.